in, but they're not showing us today.
That's because they're here, not in Phoenix, hot Phoenix.
You're in
They were in
Phoenix?
Palm Springs.
No, they're here.
Oh, there you are.
Here's Mel.
I was gonna say I saw you on Friday. Where'd you go now?
Well,
Busy bees.
Now you're back home.
Hey, Mike.
There's Barbara.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
This is
Barbara.
Kathy.
Kathy. Well, where are you? And
And
Arnie, we
Kathy,
can't see him either.
try again, Kathy. It sounded
Muted.
broken up.
Oh, somebody muted me. Yoni. I'm at a rehab center under the airport flight path.
You're breaking up really bad.
She's at a rehab center because of a leg infection, so she's having some trouble walking. So they're trying to get her back to normal.
Oh,
Yeah. Well,
sorry
normal
to
for
hear
me.
that, Kathy.
Normal for you.
Normal's
Yeah,
over.
normal for me. So it's been a crazy couple of weeks. And we're not over yet.
Oh, we're praying for you.
Thank you. I'll need every single one. Thank you, Jerry.
Yes.
Shlema.
Toda.
All right. Well, it's 12:01 by my clock, and that means we're 1 minute late. I hate to be late. We know this. So I think we should get rocking and rolling here. I know the email said it was Rabbi Rines today, but surprise, I'm not Rabbi Rines. As I'm sure everybody can figure out. So it's me today. You're stuck with me. Then you'll have him next week, and then me for 3. So you want to block those off on your calendar. That hide. It's going to be Jordy on those 3 weeks. And so today I thought I've got a topic for us. We'll start with our blessing for Torah study. We'll add a little. We'll build the suspense here together. We start thanking God for the commandment and the opportunity to engage in our world, to engage in study. So we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. Beautiful. So we talked some number of months ago. I think we did a lunch and learn about kashrut and kosher practice. Kashrut is the kosher stuff, right? The koshering, the keeping kosher. And so today I thought maybe we'd go in a different direction because I had just been reading a book that was related. And so that's what I was thinking about. And so our topic for today is, should we be vegans? Is that what Judaism is asking from us? That's our topic today. We're going to look at a couple of different pieces. And I'll stop this for a second. I want to be clear for a second. I am not vegan. I am not pushing veganism on anybody. I think this is an intellectual, Barbara's not having it. Yeah, no, I love, butter is delicious, as it turns out. And I eat yogurt every morning. So, I mean, we're not pushing that on anybody. This is an intellectual exercise to sort of play with this and say, what if we're going to really look? Is there a case here that you could make? Could you make the argument that Judaism believes we should be vegans? That's what we're going to look at today. All right. If you want to change your dietary practices, have at it. I'm not asking for it. I'm not asking for you to do it. That's my little disclaimer here. So if we're going to look at, there felt like 2 distinct pieces. There are a lot of pieces to this discussion. We're going to look at 2 sides here. We're not so much going to look at the kashrut piece. We're going to look at God's relationships with animals. And we're going to look at something called Sa'ar Balei Chayim, which we'll talk about in a moment. But first, just this first text here. Who is dinging? I don't know who's dinging. This first text here felt significant. It's just a line from Psalms. Abraham Joshua Heschel actually wrote a book and titled it based on this verse. Wrote a book about his experiences growing up in Eastern Europe and the experience of, sort of less memoir than I made it sound, but The Experience of Eastern European Jewry. It's a fabulous, fabulous read. It's about this thin. It'll take you 10 seconds. It's called The Earth is the Lord's. Beautiful, very compelling. So we have this idea that comes from Psalms. Adonai haaretz. The earth is Lord's, or the earth is God's. Umiloa tevel v'yoshveva. And the fullness thereof, all of the fullness of that earth, of the world, and all those who dwell in it are also God's, right? All of this is God's. God is overseeing all of it, right? We talk about, we tend to speak fairly human-centric, right? That we were created in God's image as humans. We talk about humans' relationship with God. But fundamentally, the way our creation exists and the way we talk about it, like in this Psalm text, God could potentially have a relationship with everything that's in existence in creation. So we're going to look at the way that God and our texts relate to animals. So Genesis 9:9, I'm already sick of my voice. Would someone like to read Genesis 9:9 for us? Alan.
I'll read.
Great.
Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth.
So thank you, Alan. What's established in this piece from Genesis?
We're all one.
We're all one. Susan, I think you were talking, but you're muted. I think you might have said something. Oh, you're talking to Paul. I'm a decent lip reader. So we're all one, is what Barb said. What else is this speaking to? Something really critical. So we talk about covenant. Covenant, big theme in Genesis, right? The covenant between God and Abraham, the covenant between God and all of the generations that come after. So it says, behold, I establish my covenant with you, right? Etchem, ve'et zarachem acharechem. And the zera is like a seed, and the seeds that come after you and your offspring, your generation. But it doesn't stop there. What else is this covenant? Who else does God make a covenant with? What else?
The birds, the livestock, every beast on the earth.
So the Hebrew here is really beautiful. So I'm going to highlight it. You can see this. The et kol nefesh hachaya, and every living soul. A nefesh is a soul. Chai, like we wear on I'm making a little chai necklace here, choking myself as I do it. Chai, right? Life, every living soul. It's not just the humans. It's not just the humans. There is life in all of these animals. And so frankly, I mean, it doesn't speak to it here specifically, but you could extrapolate out, right? Does that include, if it's a living thing, does that include the plants? Well, I can send this to you if you want, as he's taking a picture. Does that include the plants, right? I'm looking at a little succulent in a pot over there because anything else I'll kill. And I've killed succulents as well. It's really something I'm pretty proud of. Does that include the succulent over there, right? That's a living thing, right? We all went through high school biology. We know it has cells, right? The cells look different, but it's a living thing. How far out do you extrapolate this? Specifically mentioned, right? Va'of, in modern Hebrew, oaf is a chicken. We're calling it the birds here. Behema, which is sort of the catch-all term that we use for, it's beasts. When we talk about wild beasts at Passover, right? Behema. Here they've translated it as livestock in this translation. Sort of like all mammals at some level. Uvechol chayat haaretz, and all of the living things, chaya, of the earth. God's covenant is with more than just us. To me, that feels really significant. First of all, I think it puts us in our place a little bit, right? It's not just the humans that are important, right? Unless you humans think you are so high and mighty, it's not just you. God has a covenant with everything that's living. At the end of Psalm 150, hallelujah, hallelujah, that one, What's the line at the end? Kol hanshama tehalelia. Kol hanshama is everything that breathes. Linshom. We got my mama a necklace a few years ago for her birthday that says linshom on it. Remind her to breathe. But nobody else knows what it says except all of you now, because it's in Hebrew. Kol hanshama tehalelia. Everything that breathes shall praise God. It's not just humans. It's not just humans. To me, this feels foundational in this argument about should we be vegans. Let's take a step back, just to be clear. Vegetarians and vegans, different things, right? There are two levels here. Vegetarians don't eat any kind of meat. Vegans don't eat any kind of product from an animal, right? Takes out dairy, takes out, if you're a serious vegan, takes out honey from bees, right? And often vegans tend to carry that out into what they wear, right? About not wearing wool that comes from an animal, right? Or leather, all of those kinds of pieces. So that's what we're looking at here. So if we're looking first foundationally at the way that God relates to animals, there's a deep relationship here, and perhaps one that we don't fully understand, because there is a covenant between God and everything else that's living, just as we have a covenant with God. Is that a hand, Alan?
Yes. I watch a TV show, Life Below Zero, on National Geographic. And whenever Native American from Alaska, when they hunt, they realize they need the food. They only take what they need, and they say a prayer thankful for that food that they've been able to capture. And man, one time there was a caterpillar on the sidewalk. I was going to stomp on it. My mother said, "Don't do that. It's a living creature." And I feel man should respect what we have. And thank God I'm Jewish and don't hunt. But these hunters that go out and kill game, I don't even like when they capture tuna fish and they hit in the head, so they won't feel any pain. It just rubs me the wrong way.
Sure. I would add, you said, thank God I'm Jewish and I don't hunt. There are lots of Jews who hunt as well, right? Being Jewish does not preclude you from being a hunter.
But I hunt for this.
So we've got, Arnold, yeah.
Just, can you define more clearly what covenant means?
Great
Because,
question.
I mean, the answer is that doesn't necessarily mean you can't eat them.
No, it doesn't
We don't know
necessarily
the
mean you can't eat them. Certainly our rabbinic sages have not decided that you can't eat them. We have a lot of ink spilled on how to eat them, right? Very specific ways. So brit is what we call a covenant. And frankly, we don't have a particularly narrow definition on what that is, which is there's benefit to. But like, what else is new in Judaism, right? Well, it depends, right? So a brit we call a covenant. It's some kind of mutual agreement, typically bilateral. We tend to talk about covenant as being bilateral. So what's the covenant that God makes with Abraham? God says land and progeny. You get land, you get children, right? And what's the other side? That's what God's going to promise. If that was it, you just have to exist and I'll give you these things, says God. That would be unilateral, but it's not. It's a bilateral covenant because it's in exchange for Abraham's faithfulness in God, right? Bilateral covenant. It doesn't establish more in Genesis, right? What this covenant is. Is it the same kind of covenant with living creatures? Does God have a bilateral covenant, right? Is there some kind of agreement between God and living things and animals, right? I don't know. I'm not prepared to say no. I mean, there's lots in the world we don't know.
I have a question.
Yeah, Arnold. Sorry, Mark, and then Arnold.
Well, a vegan diet is actually deficient in certain critical nutrients, as opposed to a vegetarian diet. And I don't think God would want us to be mistreating our bodies by extending the laws that make us feel more ethical.
So It's certainly an argument for this, absolutely. And, vegan culture has evolved in such a way that there are supplements. You can have an extraordinarily healthy and nutritionally balanced vegan diet at this point in time.
But why would you need supplements? Why would you have to have supplements to have a balanced diet?
Well, so this is part of the argument, right? But if you believe that if it's antithetical to your beliefs and you want to live healthy, then you need something else happening here. Arnold, yeah.
Yeah, one other point. I didn't realize you said the word nefesh when it came to animals. I know there's been a real controversy over the years, particularly the more orthodox, whether like my little puppy Millie has a soul. And is she going to join me wherever the hell I am? Hopefully she'll be going to heaven. She deserves it. But that's a big issue. And I'm surprised the word nefesh is used.
Right there in the Torah.
Right there in the Torah. And yet it's still argued, I think. And the last thing is, in Denver, I encountered, I'm down in the South now. Down in the South, if it's not fried and it's meat, then it's not food. So, but I met somebody up there whose diet consists of she won't eat anything that has eyes. Have you guys ever heard of that?
Yes. A lot of people won't eat anything that has a face.
Jerry Garcia said that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting issue about, do animals have a soul, right? Often, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with colleagues talk about pet funerals, right? What do we do for people when their dogs die? I think that let me be a little more specific. I think that our sages, our rabbis, had a hesitancy to saying that animals have souls, right? We start to get a little murky in the categories. What's the line between an animal and a human at that point, right? Rabbis really like compartmentalization. They like to put things in boxes. It's how they comprehend the world. So there isn't conversation. They're not talking about pet funerals, right? When they're talking about mourning the loss of humans, unless it's somewhere that I missed, right? That's not what we're talking about. And Genesis says, nefesh hachaya, right? A living soul. I'm telling you, I look at my dog's eyes. There's someone home, right? There's someone in there. I believe it. I think that it starts to get messy. And if you're a meat eater, if you start to say that my dog has a soul, but that cow over there, that was the steak in my fridge, you start to get a little funky, right? And so I think that there are all kinds of slippery slope pieces in here. But we're going to look, because it is very important to the rabbis that we're kind to animals on a deep kind of level, in a deep kind of way. Actually, we might love to go out of order. I'm gonna move a little bit. I want to look at this next category here on this page. We may or may not go back. We've got a few other ways that we're talking about God and God's relationship to animals. But if we go down, we have something called Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim. Sa'ar, anybody's Yiddish speaking family ever talk about tsuris, right? You know what tsuris is? A worry. Sa'ar is the same root. It's the same root as tsuris. It's a Hebrew version. Sa'ar is suffering. Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim is suffering to animals. This is the term that is used through our rabbinic literature. Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim. A Ba'al is an owner. Ba'al Habayit is the guy who owns the house, right? Ba'alei Chayim are owners of life. I love the term. I love when you parse it out. That's what our rabbis call animals, which is fascinating in and of itself, right? That's the term we're using for an animal, is an owner of life, right? They're not just sort of hanging out. They live, they have lives, they own life within them. To me, it feels significant. I love Hebrew. So the rabbis are very concerned with the suffering of animals, and it roots back. This is one of the, from Exodus here, this is one of the pieces that we often reference as sort of the root of this concern for animal welfare. Would someone like to read for us this Exodus 23 piece here? I'll make it bigger, sorry.
I read.
Thanks, Barb.
If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him.
So what does this teach us?
Is us that the person owns the animal.
So a person owns the animal. Okay.
But you can't be cruel to the animal. I mean, that's the
You can't
bottom
control
line.
the animal. You can
therefore
hate
it's
that
not-
guy.
Correct. And the question is, you probably don't have the same rules for your plant. At least that's the way one would approach it. Clearly, an animal feels and you're not allowed. I mean, Judaism condemns torturing it. At least I think so.
Exactly. So what this says, right? I hate my neighbor. My neighbor's just the worst. Just the worst, total jerk, right? But if my neighbor left their dog outside in the heat, the dog's out of water, I have to go take care of that dog, right? Animals should not suffer based on my own feelings about another human, right? There's a priority order here. That human could have been terrible to you, could have been awful to you, but the animal didn't do anything, right? And so we have a responsibility to go and take care of that animal, right? If you see the donkey of one who hates you, if the donkey is lying down under its burden, right? So the donkey's carrying too much weight, has too much stuff on its back, you have to go help it. Doesn't matter if you don't like the person, because even though the person owns it, right? What are they distinguishing? They're separating the owner, right? Jerry said it means they own it. They're separating the owner from the animal. Why? Why do we separate the owner from the animal?
Because they're two separate beings.
They're two separate beings, which is on its own a radical idea, right? This animal is its own being, right? I own my dog, right? The dog wearing a tag that says, return to me, I'll pay you money, right? Return her to me because she's mine, just like, your suitcase. A suitcase, remember when we used to touch those? A suitcase has a tag in the back that says, return to me, right? Here's my info. The dog wears one. I own her, but she is her own entity as a living life, separate from a human. Alan, yeah.
I used to take leftover kiddish food in the kitchen to the homeless downtown. And if I would see a homeless person with a dog or a pet, I would ask him, are you taking care of the dog? Are you helping him out? And they're doing the best they can, but that would bother me if they were not taking care of their animal.
Absolutely. So we have this idea, and this is Exodus, right? We're not even adding layers onto our tradition. We have in Genesis that God has a covenant with animals, and in Exodus that an animal is its own thing, right? You should not superimpose your issues with a human onto your issues with an animal, right? Because it's its own entity. It's kind of radical already, right? They're separate pieces.
But the ethics of it are pretty good. I mean, because you could be just a jerk of a person and hate everybody that you see, but you're going to pet the dog when he walks by you.
Or
You
not,
ask the owner first.
or not. If
An
you're,
excellent clarification. If you ask the owner, it's always remarkable to me how many people just like put a hand down in front of a dog's face without asking. You should always ask. Teach your children and your grandchildren, ask to pet the dog. It makes me wild since we got the dog. I'm like shocked by it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right there, the rabbis have instilled on this deep level some kind of propensity towards, or even an awareness of, that we should be kind to animals. Beyond that, we should do it. It's an awareness that they are deserving of this kindness because they are living things in covenant with God, in a covenantal relationship with God. And even though we have all of these rules about kashrut, right, keeping kosher, a significant portion of what we have about keeping kosher is about butchery, how we butcher the animals. So there's debate about the root intention of those rules, right? Is the intention about maintaining purity, about cleanliness and non-cleanliness? Or is the intention about some level of kindness shown towards an animal in the butchering process? There's some back and forth debate. People of the animal rights camp, and vegans certainly will tell you that even under kosher butchering requirements, you don't want to watch it. I've watched all of these documentaries. But once you see it, you got to be prepared for it to send you in another direction. Because it's hard to watch. It's legitimately hard to watch, even with kosher standards. And so many will say, oh, but kosher meat, it's killed in a kinder way. Objectively, perhaps, and in practice, it's not as much so as we might like to think it is. It's still tough viewing. So we have this piece, fabulous story. I love this. It comes from the Midrash. So Midrash Shemot Rabbah, which means it's the book of Midrash based off of Shemot, off of Exodus. So it says, our teachers have said, once while Moses, our teacher, was tending his father-in-law Yitro's sheep, one of the sheep ran away. Moses ran after it until it reached a small shaded place. There the lamb came across a pool and began to drink. As Moses approached the lamb, he said, I did not know you ran away because you were thirsty. You're so exhausted. He then put the lamb on his shoulders and carried him back. The Holy One said, since you tend the sheep of human beings with such overwhelming love, by your life, I swear you shall be the shepherd of my sheep, Israel. I love that story. What happened? Moses gets to lead the people of Israel. Why? Right? The Midrash is explaining. Midrash often works backwards. Okay, this happened. Let's understand how we could have gotten there. So how are they backtracking? How are they explaining that Moses leads the people of Israel? Why does he merit that?
Merits it because he had compassion for an animal, and he would have compassion for the members of his flock.
Compassion on this animal, and as Alan expanded, that then transitively, right, God thinks that he would have compassion over God's flock, right? If we're sort of relating it, right, it's actually sort of an interesting analogy he's making, right? That will go back to everyone's SAT taking days, right? God is to humans as humans are to animals. That's essentially the paradigm he's setting up. Arnold, you look suspect. You're not buying it.
I guess, the question is where is the line crossed?
I'm good.
I mean, clearly, the animals have the capability at some level to interface with humans to the point that you actually form a relationship. At least the way I was raised, the argument was at that point, that animal now no longer can be treated the same way you would treat the tree in your backyard, or even the cockroach that runs across your kitchen. Okay, because there's no interface there. There's no touching of your soul. That's why the moment you name an animal, it's a pet, and you're not allowed to eat that animal. At least that's the way I was raised. I don't know if many adhere to that, but everybody's got to come to their own reconciliation with this. And the hard part is when I tell Alan what he's got to believe, or when some vegan tells me what he believes or she believes. That I resent, because I don't think it's very murky in all directions.
Listen, that lines up with where I stand on most things, right? I'm a believer that I care less about your end decision. I care about the process to get there, and that you've engaged in a thoughtful decision-making process, right? The more of those we can have in our lives, the more decisions we reach through thoughtful introspection and learning, I think the better we are as people, right? I think it impacts us positively, and I think we live better lives, right? Because we've made conscious decisions. I don't care if tomorrow you wake up and say, I'm done with cheese forever. I'll be very sad for you because cheese is just delicious. But if you want to take that route, have at it, right? And if you wake up tomorrow morning and say, steak and eggs it is, Also cool with me. My whole feeling is that we should engage in a process to understand and to study and to really reflect on our practices, right? So I'm certainly not going to tell you to go be a vegan or to go be a carnivore or to be anything there in the middle, right? It's your decision. But what's important is that we look at what exists in our world to help us inform these decisions, and that those decisions are just that, they're decisions as opposed to something that you just sort of do, right? I find this in my life all the time. I will just sort of do something and I don't even realize it's a passive choice I've made until something sparks it, right? Someone talks about something, or I see a documentary and I read a book or read an article or whatever it may be, talk with one of you about something, right? And you realize, I never really thought about that. That's just the thing I did. How could this be an active choice as opposed to a passive path we're walking down? So I love this story, this Moses piece, right? Not only for the analogy being made between God to the people and the people to animals, right? But this was sort of a huge thing that Moses merited. To lead the people of Israel, big deal. He screws it up a little in the end, right? He doesn't get into the promised land. That's neither here nor there. We're not quite there yet. But how does he merit this immense honor, arguably one of the greatest roles in Jewish history? And we've got a lot of history. How does he merit it? He doesn't.
Nice.
Yeah, he doesn't merit it. There isn't a child in danger who he rescues in a dramatic fashion, right? We always joke, my parents live on Cape Cod, and so the life on the water is really different. I miss water living out here. It's my only complaint with Colorado. There's no water. But so it always used to be a joke. My dad would go on these rescue missions, right? So he's very handy. And so he'd take someone's boat would be having an engine problem, right? And he'd go out and he'd do a rescue, right? He'd help them with their engine. That would be the whole story, right? Engine's down, he goes out, he helps them, he comes home. By the end of the night, it will have been that there were 17 people on a little life raft with this little engine, right? And there was someone bleeding from the leg, and there was a pregnant woman going into labor, and there was a screaming baby, right? And he rescues them all. The story gets more dramatic as it goes, right? This is totally how we operate in my family. This is the story of my childhood. But that's not what happened here. That's not what Moses did. What did he do? It was really simple.
He rescued a lamb.
He rescued a lamb. And frankly, could that lamb have potentially survived? Yeah. All the lamb was tired.
But historically, people that rescue lambs or are nice to animals, track record, I mean, don't necessarily mean that their approach to humans is going to be that way. Hitler had a German shepherd named Blondie. I don't know that. He was very kind to that animal. I mean, man, you should be treated like that animal. He was one of the greatest killers of all time. So I'm a little troubled by the fact that he rescues a lamb and he hands them over to the entire people of Israel. I mean, that's fine, but I would have liked him better to have rescued some person or showed compassion to a person than to an animal. Now you're crossing a line, and I don't know. Anyway.
It's a great point. Listen, there are always exceptions to every rule, right? That's why few rules are absolute.
Ani, there's a time for animals and a time for human beings. In Kenya, this couple adopted Annie's animal, went astray, was an orphan. And 5 years later, he had his favorite lion cub. 5 years later, well, he had to let it go because if he could put it back into the jungle and his native habitat. Well, 5 years later, someone came and said, "Hey, John, Tonto is back," whatever the name of the lion was. And I got to go out and see. No, he's big and he's claws and he'll eat you. Stand behind 2 fences and see what he does. He said, "I'm going to stand in front of the fence." And the lion came charging, hugged him with his paws and licked him. Now you tell me that animal wasn't, well, he was rescued, so he always remembered his rescuer. But this shows you the strength the man had, knowing that this animal would not hurt him. after all of these years.
Well, that's because people that got hurt never came back to tell the story.
You're right.
So
But if you have it in your heart to try it, do it.
Arnie, to your point, right? Hitler had a dog and was really good to his dog. There are always exceptions, right? And it was funny because it was actually at the CCAR, the rabbis conference convention a couple months ago. We were having a conversation about Tselem Elohim being created in God's image, which may or may not be a High Holy Day sermon. I haven't been able to put it down yet. And we're talking about losing your B'Tselem Elohim status. Can you lose it? And someone said, well, what about Hitler? And the speaker, whose name is Shai Held, he's a brilliant scholar, he said, this is the Hitler, I think he called it the Hitler exceptionalism. Everybody always goes to that, right? We're having conversations saying, well, what if it was Hitler? It's always where we go, right? To use as an exception. And he said, at some level, there are always exceptions to the rules, right? And if you believe everyone has the capacity that Hitler had within them, if you go looking for it in every space, that's such a beautiful way to live, right? We start to doubt the goodness of humanity, right? If Hitler is always the paradigm. And would it be better if we allowed ourselves to acknowledge that there are extremes on every spectrum, there are extremes on either end. You put those aside and you operate within the, if there's 2.5% on this extreme and 2.5% on this extreme, let's leave those aside and let's look at the 95% of humans somewhere in the middle, right? We say every morning in our prayers, El Hayne Shamash Natata Bi Torahi. God, the soul you have given me is pure, right? We believe in our inherent capacity for goodness. And we say it every morning in my belief, because it's a reminder that today I've got another chance. I've got another chance to be good in the world, right? I may have been a jerk yesterday. I may have just been the worst, but today I'm going to get another shot, right? There's always an exception, right? And Hitler's the great example of it, right? We can always use Hitler and get mad about Hitler, right? And Hitler would have done this, but Hitler would have done that. It's hard to live that way, because I think if we layered that example on to almost anything, we could sort of demolish what we believe about humanity, or not what we believe. Maybe that's too narrow. We could demolish any sort of optimism about humanity, because someone like Hitler existed.
Well, Hitler was a vegetarian, and I don't hold that against him, but I wouldn't like him even more if he was a vegan. Try and invite him over for dinner. You have nothing in your house he can eat.
Who would want him for dinner? Yuck.
Rabbi, I'm sorry I opened this thing up.
Yuck,
Can
yuck.
you ask a
Hitler.
question? But am I the only one that's bothered by the idea that the example that's being used is not, I chose you, Moses, because, there was a guy landing in Iraq, he's your worst enemy, he's just stolen from you, and you didn't choose to kill him. In fact, if anything, you got him up, you got him dressed, and you returned him to his normal thing, rather than an animal thing.
Jerry, what do you got?
Reference for why I would turn over a country. I'm not that impressed.
Yeah, but Arnie, the thing is, it's easy for a human to love another human, but for a human to love a different kind of an animal is a stretch, and that was probably a justification for it.
I think that's a
No,
really great.
Good
In
point.
some ways, it's easier to love an animal than it is a human being.
Animals are unconditionally love you. If you come home in a bad mood, you don't stay in a bad mood very often. Once you get a dog.
You just hug them. They
Your
love
husband
you no
pees on the
matter
floor.
what.
Your husband pees on the floor, you're going to be really unhappy. The dog, you forgive it a little more.
I
Right?
wondered why Lori was mad at me the other day.
Oh.
The other thing, sort of building off of what Jerry offered us, I think that perhaps a way we could read this as a lens, if we're uncomfortable with the animal piece, don't look at it as an animal, look at it with those with whom you have a power differential. Because I think that's a huge piece of this here, right? There is a significant power differential as in how much power I have in the world, how much autonomy and agency that Moses has versus that lamb, right? That lamb, what left because his basic needs weren't being met. Moses can meet his own basic needs. The lamb was struggling to meet his basic needs. And so Moses, you could read this, I think, reasonably as understanding how much power he holds over this lamb, right? That's a good leader. A good leader sees and acknowledges and understands the power they hold in a space and doesn't use that or doesn't abuse that, right? And maybe that's what God sees in Moses here. He sees Moses is understanding where he exists in the power hierarchy. And he's treating this creature over which he holds an immense amount of power, right? I have an immense amount of power over my dog, right? We train them to respond to us. I tell this dog when to do what, right? On a good day, right? This dog depends on me to feed it and to give it water. This dog depends on me to not die, right? That's because we've domesticated these animals, but there's a huge power differential. And perhaps that's what Moses is seeing, is noticing and acting on. And maybe that's what God sees as a promising sign of a leader. So I came across a piece of Talmud and studying this week that I hadn't seen before. The aspirations are to get through a 7-year Daf Yomi cycle, but I am horrible at doing anything daily. I can hardly manage to take my morning vitamins on a daily basis. So, remembering to study Talmud every day, I'm working up to it. I'm getting there to get through a Daf Yomi cycle consistently. And I am unwilling to start one unless I'm truly committed till the end. So when we started, a year ago, when a new one started to do daily Talmud study to get through it in 7 years, I was not ready for it. I'm prepping myself for 6 years from now. So I came across, moral of the story, I came across a piece of Talmud I hadn't seen this morning. And I think it's great. So again, I'll remind everybody, I pulled this translation from Sefaria.org, great resource. I think we've used it a lot in the last year, so I think a lot of us are familiar with it. One of the great things they do is that Talmud is missing a bunch of words if you want to try and read it fluently. And so the bold speaks to exactly what's in this Hebrew over here, and the non-bolded text is what they add to help it make meaning and to help it read. So the Gemara is the new pieces of the Talmud, right? It's what comments and builds off of the Mishnah, which is quoted in Talmud. The Gemara stated that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's suffering came upon him due to an accident. What was that accident that led to his suffering? The Gemara answers that there was a certain calf that was being led to slaughter. The calf went and hung its head on the corner of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's garment and was weeping. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said to it, "Go, as you were created for this purpose." It was said in heaven, since he was not compassionate towards the calf, let afflictions come upon him. We'll keep going. The Gemara explains this statement and left him due to another incident. One day, the maidservant, so explaining how he got the afflictions is paragraph 1, how he gets rid of the afflictions, paragraph 2. One day, the maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was sweeping his house. There were young weasels lying about, and she was in the process of sweeping them out. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said to her, "Let them be. As it is written, the Lord is good to all, and his mercies are over all his works." They said in heaven, since he was compassionate, we shall be compassionate on him, and he was relieved of his suffering. So what happened? What just happened here? So how did he end up with afflictions? Unclear what the afflictions are, right? Some kind of suffering.
Saurus.
What happened? What did he do? This animal, right? There was a calf being led to slaughter. A calf, a baby animal.
Yeah, you aren't supposed to take a bird out of its nest. So you probably aren't supposed to take a calf out of its pen with his mother.
Right. Right. We're not so into veal. Right, baby animals. We don't love that. So this calf was being taken to slaughter, and the calf hung its head on his coat and was weeping. A weeping animal.
More
And what
importantly,
is-
the calf knew he was going to be slaughtered, and he let him go anyway. That's absurd.
And so, right. And why does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi send him? This calf is weeping.
That's what you were made for.
Yeah.
You were made for this. It's my dad's argument of why he eats meat. He said if God didn't want us to eat meat, he wouldn't have made animals out of meat. He wouldn't have made them out of meat if he didn't want us to eat them. Which isn't a great argument because humans are also made out of meat and we're pretty not into cannibalism, right? Well, we seem pretty clear on that one. Mel, you look less clear. So he said you're made for this.
Packer.
Hmm?
What's his name? Packer,
Alfred Packer,
Alfred Packer.
the cannibalist.
Yes.
Yikes. Yeah, Paul.
I think whoever writes this must have been smoking stuff that's heavier than marijuana.
Why? Because he's having a
I'm sitting
conversation.
here, I mean, really? I go back to the donkey carrying the burden. Why doesn't he just unload half of the burden and let the donkey go on his way? And he can carry the rest. I mean, there's no creativity here. Well, there's a lot of creativity.
It's either
I
a
mean-
lot or nothing.
I mean, you're being a real rabbi. You're reading things so deep with second and third thoughts that, you're doing your job, but I'm sitting here going, "Oi," we all have passion towards animals. Arnie, I'm almost finished. I mean, I think we're all compassionate towards animals and things like that, but I think Arnie's right when he says it would have been better if he was compassionate towards human beings in some way, and a leader of something along those lines. How can he be a leader if he's just compassionate to a lamb? I still don't understand that, and I really don't. I mean, if it was a herd of lambs and he carried one.
So
There you go.
maybe all the more so that it was only one lamb, right?
But it got him the gig,
It got him the gig,
It got him the gig, but I mean, these are the kinds of things that we have to, thank you for saying I'm being a good rabbi here, but you have to parse these pieces out, right? To try and understand something. Because on the surface, it's like, really? He got like the best gig in Jewish history because he gave a lamb some water? Really?
Right.
This is why you have to start to dig into it, because otherwise it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we can read it as the power differential. We can read it and say, it wasn't even a whole flock of sheep, flock of sheep. It wasn't even it wasn't a lot of sheep. It was one sheep, right? It was one living soul that God is in covenant with. God has a relationship to this animal. God has put life into this animal. And Moses had such value for God's creation and what God put in the world that he would work so hard to help that one lamb. And
Rabbi Jordy, this is why you're leading the discussion. This is why you're leading the discussion, because you're a rabbi.
So, yeah, I mean, could that be, right? That Moses has such respect for what God has done in the world that he's going to put that much energy in to save one little lamb, right? Arnie, yeah.
No.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, that story from the Talmud, though. The idea that when the calf beat and he went and killed him, God didn't like that, or the heavens didn't like it. You all know the story with Temple Grandin. Are you guys familiar with that? How she
Yeah,
totally
I am.
changed how the whole beef slaughtering enterprise went.
Right.
Not because of compassion, but it turns out that the beef did better. They weren't as banged up. They didn't know what was coming. In other words, the compassion line, once that animal was suffering, I mean, if I was up in heaven, I also would have taken that big stab and said, "Thoris," on this guy, because the lamb was weeping, or the cow was weeping, and he went ahead and killed him anyway.
I told this to people before, but when I finished my regular Hebrew school and we had to start going to junior high school, the first class that they taught us was how to shecht a cow with a shechting knife. It had to be this sharp so that if you held the hair out of between your fingers and go like that, it would cut that. I went home that night and I said, I don't think I want to continue this anymore. I didn't want to continue anyway, but that's when I dropped out.
Yikes. Yeah, I wouldn't lead with that. That wouldn't be where I'd start.
Pardon me?
That doesn't, wow. I'm just surprised by the story.
Has anyone seen the stockyards outside of Wichita, Kansas?
I lived
It's-
in Omaha.
They're horrendous. It's
The odor.
horrendous to see thousands and thousands of cattle all in these stockyards waiting for slaughter. I mean, it is vile to me.
Yeah.
It's an experience.
Omaha had
And-
mostly
and in
stockyards in
Denver,
the
we
50s and
used to-
60s. And it's on Sunday night is when the farmers would bring in their beef on their cattle on the hoof on trucks. And the whole city smelled like dead cows. Omaha was known for that. It doesn't happen anymore. They cleaned up their act.
I'll tell you, I have I've never had beef in my life. Never had a bite of beef ever. So I have a hard time with that one. Never, ever. I grew up in a house. My dad was a vegetarian. Everybody's looking at me like I'm crazy. My dad was a vegetarian when we were kids. And so there were like, chicken nuggets in the house for me and my brother when we were little ones. But by the time he now is a carnivore, but by the time beef made its way into the house, I already had no interest. My brother will eat anything that was once living. He's eaten all kinds of crazy stuff all over the world. Not my thing. Not my thing.
Not mine neither.
Now they
My
have
husband-
artificial beef.
My husband has done it.
So
I can't do it.
Mark just said artificial beef. So if it's like the vegan products that I don't do either, because I don't like meat, and so the things pretending to be meat are also not appealing to me. But it is, a lot of these are really interesting discussions about lab grown meat. Have anybody
This is
seen all the
good.
stuff about this?
A Burger King Amazing Burger, and where I live, they have some other names for it. And it's actually better than the regular beef.
It
It's also
tastes
got more
not
fat
for
and
health, Mark.
calories.
Did you
Pardon me?
catch the mark? Did you catch the health thing on you can't believe it's beef or whatever it is? They have a provision of it that says this is not, because of the saturated whatever they put in. This is not more healthy than going out and taking a chomp out of a cow. It's not a health thing.
So they're now growing that now the new thing, and it's a big conversation within kashrut. I think I have a classmate who wrote a thesis on it, or was potential thesis topic is about the lab grown meat, which is meat. They're figuring out how to grow it that didn't come off of an animal, right? And so is that kosher? Can you eat lab grown bacon? Right? You grow the bacon in a lab. It was never on a pig. It was never unclean, right? Although pigs are actually clean animals, neither here nor there. Is that kosher, right? Ethically, if your concern is about harm to animals, no animal has been harmed in the making of this bacon, right? I don't know. It's a really interesting halachic debate around it, right? Because it requires you to go to the root of the idea. Where do all of these, which is exactly what I love to do, right? Where does this come from? What is the intention of these laws, of this structure? And then if we change the system, how do I layer that intention onto this new system? Right? This is why we want to operate with intention of law as opposed to just the byproduct of that intention, right? We want to understand the core so that as our world changes, we can respond to the world honoring that initial intention as opposed to operating with rules that were created to fuel that intention for another society and another time. That's my soapbox. Mel.
I don't know how many of you have been on safari, but you go on safari and you go out into the wild and you see what one species of animal does to another species of animals. And they all have a covenant with God. Are we different as humans because we have intellectual capacity and the capacity to reason? Should we be living with a different set of laws than all of the other species who have the same, I presume, the same covenant of God, with God that we do?
It's a great question. And, especially you're talking safari, and then Julia, I see your hand, it'll be Julia next. You look at some of these apes with the thumbs and the hands and the eyes, and you're looking at something that just looks so extraordinarily human. And it's at some point, some of these really intelligent animals, you look, Anybody ever been around elephants, right? You look in an elephant's eyes, right? It starts to get really human in a way that almost rattles us a little, right? Because they start to feel a little close to where we are, a little close. Julia.
There's a
Well, when was
podcast I was listening to a few weeks ago. It was after the guy who invented tofuti died. And right. And I guess for the Orthodox community, having something like tofuti or non-dairy creamer or these substitutes were really helpful, because you could then, eat things that are like dairy, but they aren't technically dairy. So it's like that loophole. But the hosts of the boat were asking the question, like, but then are you not keeping kind of to the letter of what the mitzvot's intention was by using this substitute that echoes dairy? And it was really interesting discussion, I think, where you get into that nitty gritty of what's the core thing happening with kashrut? What's the meaning behind it? Why should we do it? Because it says a big thing, don't mix milk and meat, that's a big thing. So why would you fake it? And like fake bacon, I think really
it's a
fits.
Huge discussion. It's such a great point, right? We start to get into an issue. It's called ma'arat ayin, which is what someone might see. Right. So I used to work, I've shared this story a number of times, but I'm a broken record at a young age. So everyone is screwed when I'm older, because I'm just going to say the same words over and over. But I used to work for a modern Orthodox rabbi. I used to be his teaching assistant when I was in high school, and loved him. He loved Starbucks coffee. I hate Starbucks coffee. He loved it. And he loved it, but he would not go into Starbucks to get it because Starbucks is not a kosher restaurant, right? There's bacon, there's mixing of milk and meat, it's all kinds of stuff. Starbucks is not kosher, and so he would not go into Starbucks to get it. He would, however, let me go into Starbucks to get it, and then he'd pour it in a travel mug and drink it out of the travel mug in class, right? Because for him to go in with his kippah, well known in the community, that causes a ma'arat ayin issue, because if someone sees him do that, they might think, oh, this is kosher, right? I can go and eat there because he's going to eat there. And he might have then led someone to break law. You start to get into problematic territory. And so this is the same issue with, fake cream cheese. Especially, it's been a really big conversation as the vegan movement has grown and the availability of non-meat, meat-looking products has grown. Can you do that, right? Our Orthodox friends who struggle with turkey bacon. I don't get why anybody needs bacon, ever. I mean, I've never had it, so I don't get the bacon thing. But everybody struggles with it. It's a really great question, because you start exactly what you're saying, Julia. You start to get into the question of intention. What's the point, right? If I can work my way around this, which is something that happens in the ultra-Orthodox communities, there's so many tweaks and workarounds. Like, you're not supposed to turn on a light on Shabbat, make fire. So they make lamps. They make all kinds of stuff, but they make lamps where the light is always on, and there's like a blackout curtain shade that goes around it. And you move the shade around the lamp based on what kind of light you want. So you haven't changed the light, you haven't made fire, but it's a way to turn and make the room darker without turning the light on and off. Am I still honoring that commandment? Or have I created such a loophole that I've lost the intention? I think you've lost the intention, right? I actually think much of what we're doing in Jewish spaces is honoring the intention and original rooting of Judaism more so than that lamp. But that's what the Reform rabbi says. So,
Well, it's like the old story where the rabbi walks by a restaurant and there's Moshe who's has a pig in front of him. And the rabbi said, next Shabbat, I'm going to talk to this guy. Did I see you eating pig? He said, no, I ordered an apple, but the pig came with it.
Gary, and then I think Mark.
I'm
Jerry?
sorry.
Go ahead.
Who?
Jerry, what do you have
Me.
to say? Yeah, you.
No, I was just going to say, all of the meat kosher meat in Israel is kosher meat. In other words, if you go in to any restaurant, whether it's a kosher restaurant or it's not a kosher restaurant, the beef is kosher. And a friend of mine, she liked this restaurant that was not kosher. And when I'm in Israel, I wear a kippah all the time. So I go with my friend to this restaurant and I ordered lamb kebabs. And the waitress says to me, it comes with mashed potatoes and there's milk in the mashed potatoes. Do you want that? And I said, no, give me something else. So she brought out French fries. And I was amazed, but just the fact that she saw the kippah on my head, she warned me that the mashed potatoes came with milk in it.
Absolutely. That used to happen all the time in Jerusalem. I was living in Jerusalem and I'd go out to dinner with classmates, and classmates who would wear a kippah, we'd walk into a non-kosher restaurant and they'd say, we aren't kosher. My classmates, they don't know from Reform Jews, right? So I say, no, I'm good. I got it. But they'll warn you. It's really interesting. Right? Trying to help people out. And honestly, on a practical level, make less of an issue for them, for when someone is pissed later that they should have told them something or told them it was different. Mark, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, in my grandfather's generation, the conscription into the Russian army was 17 years. And that was like, can you imagine that? Every male in your family taken out of your family to serve in the army for 17 years, unless you get, there's great stories about how they got out. But anyway, he tells me this story that they asked the rabbi, what do I do when they serve us pork? And we have to eat it because there's going to be nothing else to eat for a while. The rabbi said, this was not a Reform rabbi. He said, you can eat it, but don't like it and don't lick the pan.
Listen, everybody has found their own route through, right? At the end of the day, this is like my mantra here. Life is really hard. Life is really hard. Everybody has to find their way through. And I'm not going to judge what someone else's way through life looks like, whether it looks like what I've chosen or it looks different. I think everybody's got their own path. That's why I'm never going to tell you what to think or what to do. I think that's not the point. What is the point is that we engage in our world and we struggle with these things and we study and we look at different sides and we try to get to some kind of place that feels intellectually responsible, maybe we could say, or at least rooted in something. So we're not just making choices willy-nilly. We're not making choices at all, just sort of doing without kind of any rooting or information. So whether you're going to be a vegan or you're going to go, have a turkey sandwich for lunch, Gehgesund, as my bubby would say, off you go, and enjoy your lunch. That's what I got for you today. Thanks for studying, everybody. If you want to join me tonight, we have Women's Torah study at 6:30 tonight. So the email went out. I think it's also on your daily docket email as well. So join us for Women's Torah study if you are a woman. And if not, we'll see you all Shabbat. Tomorrow night's confirmation, so it's a fun service. There's no attendance in person except for confirmation families for tomorrow night. So for those of you who've been coming in person, we will see you next Friday night for Shabbat, but we'll see you online tomorrow night during confirmation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.